I'm Tony Esselin.
And I'm Amy Bernard.
And we are here to help make it make sense.
This is the podcast that takes complicated science and breaks it down into easy to understand language.
So buckle up, buttercups. You are in for a bumpy ride.
All right, we're recording.
And we're back, y'all.
Yeah, it is early December. And today we are actually celebrating Thanksgiving today, later this afternoon.
Are you really?
Yeah, we were unable to do this earlier because we actually took our first family vacation in since before March of 2020.
Oh, wow. Very good. I think I saw your pictures. You went to St. Lucia. Pretty.
Yeah, it was amazing, but we did not have any food, any Thanksgiving food. So that's happening today, which is awesome. How about you?
Yeah, we did Thanksgiving, and it's the time for my mom to show off. So I always look forward to that.
Nice.
She's already an amazing cook and puts her foot in it.
Nice.
Thanksgiving. So that was really awesome. And it's the first time that we had like a relatively bigger gathering than before, since the 2020s.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really, really nice. Got to do a lot of bonding with family and stuff. And that was really cool. Yeah, it was great. And then of course my husband is addicted to Christmas, and of course he was jingle belling it on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
putting up the tree. I was like, calm down. It's supposed to be on Friday.
Oh, that's funny. So my guess, when he goes into retail stores that put up Christmas things like right after Halloween, he's not upset.
Oh, no. He's like,
yeah,
he's doing that in like October.
Yeah, because I remember I went to a retail store. Gosh, it was right around Halloween, and there was like a whole Christmas section, and I was like,
they're not waiting anymore. Like,
I was like, no, I feel like this is inappropriate.
Yeah. Like pumpkin spice latte in August.
Excuse me while I sip on a pumpkin spice latte. This is not like a peppermint one yet. All right, settle down. Even coffee shops know. Anyway, so we are here today.
Yes. What are we talking about?
Not just for this. There is breaking news. So
breaking news.
In November, so very recently, there has been an outbreak of measles in Columbus, Ohio. And this measles outbreak is among unvaccinated kids. So, and it's mostly kids, and they're all unvaccinated, at least to date. And there are at least 50 individuals that are positive for measles. I think right now it's up to, last I read was 54. And 20 of them have been hospitalized, which is one of the complications of measles. So they don't know how it started. Typically, this type of thing comes from travel outside the U.S. However, I think that it's unclear. They think it's suspected to be related to travel outside of the U.S., but they are not clear as far as where exactly this first case came from. But it's spread through, my understanding is some daycares and places like that, and a church. So people that were, together, close contact, community, and it is in unvaccinated individuals. So what's kind of scary about this, as I was reading more about this area of Ohio, is that it sounds like about 25% of all eligible kids are not vaccinated for measles. So 25%. And measles is really, really highly contagious. And in order for us to protect the community, like to have that community or herd immunity, we need 95% of individuals who are eligible to be vaccinated to protect those that cannot be vaccinated. So people who can't get vaccinated are kids under 1. The first dose is between 12 and 15 months, and then the second dose is between 4 and 6 years of age. So I think it's 9 to 10 of the kiddos that have this in this current outbreak. Of the 54 that are infected to date, are under the age of 1, but the rest of those are eligible. So that's very concerning. So 25% unvaccinated just means that there are a lot of kids in the community that could potentially pick up this disease. So that's the breaking news that we wanted to, have this podcast be about, is measles. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on what measles is, and then we're going to go to Dr. Tony and get a little bit more of kind of like the clinical information about the virus. So measles is a virus. It's an RNA virus. We know that viruses have different genetic instructions, and this one just happens to be an RNA virus. And another thing that's interesting about this one, it's super, super contagious. The amount of individuals that will likely get infected who are unvaccinated that come into contact with someone who has measles is about 95% of those individuals that are unvaccinated, but it will spread to 12 to 18 other people from one infected individual. And I don't know if you guys remember, but in the beginning when we talked about COVID, I think with COVID, that number was like, and Dr. Tony, you can correct me if I am misremembering, they thought it was like 6 to 8 or something.
Yeah, that's right. I remember something around that number.
So this is 12 to 18. So let's say on average about 15. So this is, I would say that measles is probably the most highly contagious disease that we know of. Yeah. I think that's fair to say. And the other thing that's interesting before we head to Dr. Tony is humans are the only host. So we don't see this in rats or guinea pigs or pangolins or, any other animal. And pangolin, because remember they were talking about they thought SARS-CoV-2 was pangolin, like the black market of pangolin trade. Do you remember that at all?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so it's a very rare, cool animal that they thought was one of the reservoirs for SARS-CoV-2. But so either way, the only reservoir, the only host.
Now you're going to distract me. What's a pangolin?
What's pangolin is like it's this animal that kind of looks like an armored armadillo-y type thing. It's got these little scales. They're often sold on the black market because I think that there are certain groups of people who think that they have medicinal properties. So they sell them for like their scales and stuff. But so they're pretty rare.
Like
I know. It's sad. It's sad because, their numbers are declining. But either way, the only host of measles is humans. So Dr. Tony, I was hoping you would tell us a little bit about, first of all, have you seen any kiddos with measles ever? And if you have or have not, what should we expect to see in kids that have measles?
Yeah. So I personally have not seen measles. It is definitely something that we train about especially in pediatrics. I have seen mumps. I have seen mumps in adults. That's actually quite terrible too. But measles, just like most viral infections, it's the same kind of story: fever, malaise, feeling, runny nose. You can have what's called conjunctivitis, which is like your eyes are red and weepy. Definitely runny nose, rashes come along with it. And one thing that they bang into our heads as pediatricians to look out for, and it's one of those things that come up on our board exams and our shelf exams in medical school, is these things called Koplik spots. So that's the word, Koplik spots. And that's just a fancy word. It's probably somebody's last name, whoever discovered it, is basically just like if you can consider a whitehead, if you've ever seen a whitehead on your face or pictures of whiteheads, it's like having whiteheads on the inside of your mouth. And it's they're like raised white bumps, and they're on the inside of your mouth, mostly on the cheek, inside on the cheek. That's where they can start. And then they'll spread onto the hard palate, the soft palate. It can go throughout your mouth. It can go throughout your mouth. These Koplik spots, or these whitehead pimples, if you will, on the insides of your mouth, they kind of cluster together when they start. And if you've ever seen, actually, I was looking at pictures before this to figure out good ways to describe it. I've also, if you've ever seen a baby with thrush, sometimes you can see it can kind of look a little bit like that in terms of the way that it specks, the specks on the inside of the cheek. But either way, I mean, thrush is totally different. It's on the tongue, and it's something completely different. But if you've ever seen maybe a resolving thrush in a baby, you could start to see like these white flecks on the inside of the what we call fancy schmancy buccal mucosa. But it's basically just the inside of your cheek, right? And so you're just looking for pimples. That usually is what well, along with a fever, not feeling great, conjunctivitis, a rash, all of these things. And then you have those spots on the inside of your mouth. That's usually how we can diagnose measles. And I think the things that frighten us the most with that, because anybody can deal with a fever, right? Anybody can deal with a rash. Anybody can deal with feeling kind of, for a little bit. But what scares us, and what ends up causing the most trouble and sometimes death in some cases, are the brain issues that happen, right? The brain disease that can happen as a result of measles infections. And so one of the ones that we're afraid of is called encephalitis. It's a very long word, very complicated word to just say your brain tissue is infected. That's what that is. So you may have heard us talking about meningitis. Meningitis is just the layer around the brain. There's like a thin little layer of tissue, if you will, along the brain that can get infected. Can
we call that the saran wrap of the brain?
And sure, saran wrap is a thin layer of tissue, and that can get infected. That's called meningitis. But what happens in measles is more encephalitis, which is they're both serious. Encephalitis is a little more scary because it's actually the brain that's actually getting infected. And I haven't seen measles encephalitis, but I've seen viral encephalitis, and it's scary. It's scary. You see your child, sometimes they're not walking straight. They're kind of walking from side to side. They're hallucinating. They'll see things that are not there. Sometimes they'll have trouble talking. It's all very different, but brain infections, you don't want that. Those are really scary, and they can cause really significant trouble. So, these are the things that we look out for, and the things that we are the most worried about. And again, like Dr. Amy said, it's the contagion factor, right? That thing spreads like wildfire. I think I was reading that it's like what makes it so bad too is that it doesn't even have to be direct person-to-person contact. You can still get infected.
Yeah. So one of the things that I read about this a long time ago, because I used to teach virology, but freshly coughed pockets of air.
We keep coming back to that, y'all.
But it can be even from like talking or breathing in a location and then being with that person. Like one example that came about of a measles outbreak in New York City, in an apartment building. And I don't remember exactly when this was, but several years ago. It was an individual that was infected that got in an elevator and just simply breathed in the elevator. I don't know, several flights. And for the next 2 hours, and this is in a community that didn't have vaccination. The majority of the people that got into that elevator became infected and came down with measles. And that was because of the air that was breathed in that. And we know elevators are kind of like stagnant air. spaces. So yeah, just simply breathing air. Doesn't even have to be a freshly coughed pocket. It could be a freshly breathed pocket of air. Yeah, so you can get measles that way. So that to me, I think is just tells us just how contagious this this virus is. But for individuals that are interested, it seems like after infection, it takes like 7 to 14 days for symptoms to start. Obviously, sometimes it could be a little bit sooner than that, but 7 to 14 days. Those spots tend to come, it seems like a couple days after the like fever starts and things like that. And then, but here's the scary part. People are infectious, like can infect other people for about 4 days before they start to have symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can, so that's the other bit is you might be walking around not knowing that you have measles, and or your kids in a daycare not knowing that they have measles, and they're spreading it for up to 4 days before, and then you're infectious for several days after this onset of symptoms. So it's part of what makes measles so insidious is that it is so highly contagious, and that you can be contagious before you have symptoms. So you're walking around not realizing that you're sick. Yeah, and again, the contagious, it's about 15 people will get measles. 15 unvaccinated individuals will likely get it from the one person. So one infected individual can potentially pass it to 12 to 18, about 15 other people. This is, and like Dr. Tony said, this is can have very serious complications. This can have very serious complications. So hospitalization, it's usually 1 out of every 5 unvaccinated. However, with this Columbus, Ohio outbreak, of the 54, 20 have been hospitalized. So that's a little bit higher than this 1 in 5. Pneumonia can be a serious complication. In fact, I was reading it's about 1 in 20. And this seems to be the most common cause of death from measles. So measles is fatal, or can be fatal. And then as Dr. Tony was talking about the encephalitis, what I read was about 1 in 1,000 who get measles. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. The thing about encephalitis, though, is swelling of the brain. So, deep into the brain. This can cause kids to have, or anyone, the person who's infected, to have seizures. Yeah. And then it also can result in leaving that person deaf. So it can cause deafness. And then the other thing is it can cause cognitive disability down the road, like permanent long-term, cognitive issues. So encephalitis isn't necessarily something that you're just like, you have it and you're done, like you recover completely. Like this can cause serious long-term issues.
Well, anything that touches the brain.
Right.
Brain,
right.
It can be anything. And if anybody has had COVID and has had the neurological like issues like I did, when I got COVID over the summer, I mean, the headache was something else, and the headache was really significant. And this brain fog that people are talking about, that brain fog is a little bit of that cognitive problem. That's like a cognitive, that's a cognitive challenge, right? Like right there, and it's disabling. It can be very disabling, and so anything that affects the brain, folks can have signs and symptoms that kind of mirror a stroke almost sometimes. It just, everybody's different. In the brain is something that we're all still trying to, like, we've only scratched the surface of what the brain can do. Yeah. And so you want to try to stay away from things that can affect the brain, because it's scary. The follow-up is scary. And yes, the pneumonia, the respiratory stuff that happens with measles is all, as we all know, as we all have seen with what we've been going through the last couple of years. That's not a benign thing. That's not a simple, oh, you just have a cough, oh, you have just a little touch of pneumonia. Like, this is it can be really serious for certain folks, you know, and everybody's built differently. So
yeah, absolutely. So these are all serious things. And then another complication, which is it's usually, I've read about 2 out of every 1,000, so about 1 in 500 is death. And this is usually from the complications like the pneumonia or encephalitis. Other kind of things to be aware of are people who are pregnant. There can be some serious complications in individuals who are pregnant. And the MMR vaccine, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail here in a couple of minutes, is amazing. It is an amazing vaccine that if you are vaccinated, you will most likely not get measles. It is like just rock solid vaccine. And really that has to do with the fact that we only have one serotype of measles, thank God, right? So it's an amazing vaccine. It's very highly effective. It's very safe, but it's a version of a vaccine that we call live attenuated, which means it's like a weakened, non-harmful, so harmless form of the germ, right? So that means that people who are pregnant can't get it. So this is something you would need to have on board before you're pregnant. So this would not help someone, like you can't get it while you're pregnant. It's just anything that's a live weakened virus, we can't give. And even like people who are immunocompromised can't get those same ones. So that's something to consider. Pregnant individuals can have some serious complications. And then I was reading about one other serious complication that is pretty rare, but I just wanted everyone to be aware of it. It's called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. I know. Or SSPE, and it's rare and it's fatal. It affects the central nervous system, but essentially like sclerosing is like narrowing of the brain, like encephalitis. So it's kind of like tightening or narrowing of spaces. So this is very, very rare. But what they've found is that it's more common amongst individuals who come down with measles before the age of 2. So it's even more scary. Yeah, the littlest of littles. Yeah. So you typed something about transmission among vaccinated. I don't think that there is any.
Yeah, I think that I wanted to just mention it because it was something that, we talked a lot about during our COVID podcasting. And a lot of the time, a lot of the reason in the beginning of the COVID vaccination conversation that so many advocates were like, come on, let's get vaccinated because then we won't be able to transmit it, is basically like from the data that we have from measles, for example. Yes. It doesn't really hop around on vaccinated people. And so that's what we were hoping for.
Yeah, exactly.
but every disease is different. Every vaccine is different.
Yep. And so that's one of the reasons why this vaccine is just so amazing, is that it is one of those, it's the true story of if you get the vaccine, you are protected. Whereas like Dr. Tony was saying, based on history, we were hoping that's what we'd see with the COVID vaccines. It turns out that COVID is sneaky.
Yeah.
For reasons we've mentioned in numerous podcasts, but
a whole season of podcasts.
Yeah, a whole season.
Whole season.
So I wanted to,
just to bring that up, because for folks who are still trying to sort out understanding vaccines, and you've gotten a lot more exposure to COVID conversation because you're alive during the time where they're making the vaccines, right? And dealing with the pandemic with the measles vaccine. It's a different story for many reasons, and the kind of vaccine, and Dr. Amy's going to go through all of that, but the kind of virus that measles is, the vaccine that we have to combat it, and all of those things. So it's important to understand the differences.
Yeah. So that one's a pretty rock solid vaccine. So we were just telling you about some of the complications as to why measles is so dangerous, but I have another kind of element that I would like to make everyone aware of, that just really we had like a clue for what I'm about to tell you for a while, but we didn't figure it out, we being the scientific community, until just recently. It was in 2019 where we had solid scientific evidence. But what we found is that measles, the actual measles virus, destroys immune memory. So I think you guys probably, if you've listened to us in the past, you know that vaccines train the immune system. And one of the most beautiful elements of the immune system is that we have immune cells that can become memory cells. And these are the cells that hang around your body like for the rest of your life. Their whole job is just waiting for that germ that they're trained on, so that when that germ comes in your body, they can like just be unleashed, right? And kill it before, most of the time, before you even know that you've been infected or that you become sick. So the immune memory is one of the greatest elements of our immune system. And what has been found is that the measles virus actually destroys immune memory. So there were a couple of papers, scientific articles published in 2019, where they actually looked at kids. They looked at blood samples from kids before and after a measles outbreak that took place in the Netherlands in 2013. In this group, I don't know that they knew that the measles outbreak was coming. They had these blood samples, I think, looking at just immune function in general, but then they were able to use this information, these blood samples. And what they looked at is they had kids that were vaccinated for measles, and they had kids that were not vaccinated for measles. And they had blood samples from all these kids before the measles outbreak and after the measles outbreak. And when they were analyzing the blood from before and after in both vaccinated and unvaccinated, they found in the kids that were not vaccinated and that had measles, that their antibodies, so those are the proteins we've been talking about that your immune cells make, that go after and, you know, glom onto and surround viruses or germs and then get rid of them, their antibodies were really, really decimated. So they found that there were about, on average, about 50% of their antibodies were gone, just gone, like erased. So they'd seen these antibodies in the blood before, so before they got measles, and then in these unvaccinated kiddos, when they looked in the blood after measles, like a couple months after measles was resolved, those antibodies were nowhere to be found. And these weren't just to measles. These were antibodies to like influenza, cold viruses, like just all the antibodies, like all the antibodies that you could find in the blood. About 50% of them were now gone. And what that suggested, I know. And what that suggested was that the cells that create those were probably destroyed. So another group looked at those same kids, and it was published around the same time. And these were the journals Science and Science Immunology, which we can put in show notes if that would help anyone. But they found that it's true, the cells that produced these antibodies were being eliminated. So the way that I say it, the analogy that I have for that is like, you know, your computer crashes, right? Your computer crashes and you reboot your computer, you turn it back on, and like half the files are gone, right? So you had, you know, like, let's say you had 100 files and your computer crashed, it gets a virus They're computer viruses, right? You turn your computer back on and half your files are gone, just destroyed, eliminated, erased. You don't have them anymore. So the reason why they did this study in the first place is they were finding that unvaccinated kids that got measles tended to be more sick from like flu and colds and things that they'd seen before.
They become like immunocompromised now?
Yeah, they actually were, it was almost as if they were becoming sick from things that they had seen before, that if you'd built immunity, which they had, they wouldn't have become as sick or come into contact with those things. So it was like why are these kids that had measles, why are they worse off than their counterparts that were vaccinated? Why is this? And this is what the explanation was, is that measles wipes the hard drive. It eliminates the majority of your files, the majority, which is really, really scary, because immune memory is what we rely on for all past exposures. Like, those memory cells live in our body forever. They're there to, right, to fight. We've trained them.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, that's reason number 5063 to
I know. So what makes me really sad are these kiddos that are right now in Ohio. They're going to come out of the measles. They're going to come out of their measles infections. They may have complications. It may be a really rough journey for them, but also now when they come into contact with anything else down the road, they're going to have to rebuild, and they're going to be hit hard by those things.
Yeah, that's right. So, I think what's really difficult when we're talking about these things with folks, and this is how I try to talk to my patients a little bit, it's that like, you may get through and you may get it and nothing happens to you. And that's amazing, right? Like, look, that will be great for you if that happens, right? But the chance that you're taking, it's the risk that you're taking. Remember our risk, benefits, and alternatives analysis, the risk that you're taking, is it worth it? Because what if you're a person who's going to have a complication? Like, if you can avoid it, and everybody's risk tolerance is different. I was just having this conversation yesterday. Everybody's risk tolerance is different. There are some folks who are willing, you tell them that there's gold at the bottom of a cliff, and they're like, let me go see, and they jump, right? They're not even trying to think about it. And then there are other folks that are like, wait, hold on, let me go take my little go-kart down to the bottom and check that out, and then measure the distance with the cliff and make sure that that's not going to hurt so much. And they're doing all of these things. So everybody has a different risk tolerance depending on what the end result is going to be. And here it's kind of like we have decades and decades and decades of data, basically, of information that's telling you that you don't have to just blindly jump off the cliff. Like, we have information to help you inform your decision making. And there are just so many things that can go wrong without being vaccinated versus just actually being vaccinated and dealing with the other problems that life has to bring you. I mean, life is already complicated. There's so many things that we're battling. We're in such a tough era right now at the moment. We're in such a tough era for so many reasons. Why add this to your list? Why add this to your list? There's just so many other things to spend your time and efforts on. Battling this is not probably where a lot of their energy should go to. So anyway.
Again, so I think, no, I agree. And I think I want us to know how we got here. I think there has always been
in a past podcast, but we're going to reprise it because it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. So let's do it.
Yeah, this is important. So, how do we get here? There have been, I think, mistrust in medicine and vaccines for a long time. Yes. And it's nothing new for people to be skeptical of vaccines and medicine. Like, that's nothing new. That's nothing unusual. But back in 1998, when Tony and I were not yet Dr. Amy or Dr. Tony,
we were striving.
although we were working on it.
Working on it.
There was an article published in the Lancet, which is, you know, it's a pretty prestigious journal, but this came out in 1998, and it was a paper that was published by someone by the name of Voldemort.
His name was not Voldemort, but she won't say.
I won't say his name because I don't want to give him any press, but that's my pet name for him. But this paper was related to the MMR and was trying to link the development of autism to the MMR. Now, what's important for you guys to understand before I dive into that a little bit is that the paper was retracted. In my opinion, it took far too long for it to be retracted, which means that it was removed from the literature. It took about 10 years. And the MD who led this, he who shall not be named, was the MD that led the study lost his medical license. So it was actually taken away from him because he lied. This was a paper that was based on fraudulent data. And there's an entire website which you could go to if you want to learn more about it. There's an investigative journalist by the name of Brian Deere who did some amazing work, like over 10 years of work, piecing together all of the different elements and publishing it all and putting it all out there for everybody. But he tracked all the different elements, and it turns out that he was a pediatric gastroenterology doctor, so a GI doc and a kids doctor. It was only 12 kids that were in the study, and they had GI issues, and he subjected them to invasive like GI, like colonoscopies and things like that, trying to look at the gut. And the main data from the paper was interviews with parents, and parents talking about how they were relating some of their child's developmental delay with the vaccine, the MMR. And it came out later, and this was part of the reason why this MD lost his license, was that he was being paid by an attorney that was trying to go after vaccine companies. And the MMR was, I think, something that they had wanted to target. So there's just this whole, and by the way, Voldemort was paid about $1 million by this attorney over the course of time. And this, of course, didn't come out until later, but this is one of the reasons why this, it's unethical, it's immoral. It's an example of fraudulent work that was published and, put in the media quite a bit. I mean, it's one of the most, I would say, well, I can't say most, it's definitely a disappointing chapter in medicine. There are a lot of disappointing chapters in medicine. I think that, you could have, yeah, I mean, in the context of the way that certain groups of people have been treated, I mean, it's just like, there's a lot, but this adds to the disappointment. Sure. And this person now is paid by anti-vaccine groups to speak all the time and makes like millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars to speak at all these like rallies. And, it's just, it's actually makes me sick to my stomach. But this article is what started people really having distrust in the MMR. And this is why MMR rates dropped so precipitously after 1998. And this is one of the main reasons why why we're here right now, like why that 25% of kids are not vaccinated for MMR in Ohio. Like that's just an example of, how we got here, which I think is a sad chapter that, in medicine, that it's still continuing, because the distrust in medicine and vaccines in particular, just I think continues to grow, unfortunately.
I think I want to just to add to that is just to clarify, I can imagine someone listening to this and saying to themselves, well, yeah, he was going after the vaccine companies because they're hurting people. But that wasn't the reason. It was for financial gain. Like it would be one thing if it was, I could hear people saying that, oh, you're calling it fraudulent because he's speaking truth to power. um and that the idea is to, of course, paint him as this fraudulent physician, and make him look like he's a bad person, because he's just trying to like save people from getting this bad disease. And the thing is that, like, I can see where you could think that. I think that his initial goal was not, it was almost as if like, let's back this car into the parking lot, right? As opposed to like, let's figure out what happens if you put this car in drive. Like, it wasn't that way. It was basically like, let's try to figure out how to take this vaccine company down just so I can get paid. Like, that was the reason, was so I can be paid, not because they were doing anything bad. That's the part. And then they manipulated these poor human beings in the study. That's the part that just takes everything off the table. You manipulated these people, and then basically just use the data incorrectly. Like, there are ways to look at the data to make sure that if this was actually causing harm, and we already have precedents for this for other vaccines that have been taken off the market, because you know what, there's too much, rotavirus is a good example. In the early days, they were taken off the market. MMR has not. And the thing is that it's been improved with all of the feedback and all of the studies and all of this brouhaha around autism. They've made it and done studies. I'm talking millions of dollars have been put into this to restudy this and to make sure that this wasn't a case. And if anything, autism as a spectrum of diseases has not changed in its incidence, and it has nothing to do with the vaccine rates, right? It has nothing to do with that, because vaccine rates are not great and autism continues, right? So that by itself is telling you they're not related. And again, we've mentioned this in previous podcasts, and what I've talked about with a lot of friends and family who are worried about autism is that, like, you have to remember tools for identifying disease have also improved over time. At the same time that vaccines have become a little bit more prominent, right? And then vaccine companies have become more prominent. And I'm not saying that they're 100% ethical, because everybody should have Moderna and Pfizer at the moment with COVID, right? Like, we shouldn't be having that fight, but that's another podcast. So what I want to say is that for autism in particular, we're getting better at identifying it earlier, right? Identifying it earlier, and then understanding that it's not just one definition. There is a spectrum of disease. There's mild disease up to very severe disease, right? And all of those tools and understandings have improved over time. And so, of course, we're going to pick it up a lot. I have family members who have never been diagnosed with this, who I know, I'm like, you have this, like, you definitely have this. But again, it's just a matter of, like, back then we didn't have the tools and the attention that we have on it now to try to see if we can help folks that are on the spectrum live better lives and higher quality lives, right? And also their families. And so that's where we're at, right? And it's just a really unfortunate time in history again. And again, if you have questions, I mean, talk to your providers. Send us messages. If this still isn't clear, like, let us know. We'll talk. We'll have another podcast dedicated to it, because in some of the feedback that I've received personally about the conversations that Dr. Amy and I have been having is like, can you address autism? And we've done it, and we'll do it again. We did it again. We did it in a previous podcast. We'll continue to do it again. And whatever it takes to assuage your fear around this, is what we're willing to do. Autism, unfortunately, there's no marker for it. You can't test for it early. You have no idea. We're still trying to get our heads around how this is actually transmitted. What's the genetic components? What are the environmental components? Like, what is it? We're still not sure. The one thing, though, that we are sure is that it's not vaccine related. It's just not. Like
you're here
off the table. We can take it off the table. We've studied it to death. Like there's no relationship. Yeah. So let's put some resources into figuring out what is actually causing it, as opposed to continuing to reinvent the wheel around the fact that vaccines are not actually causing this.
I'm glad you said that. I completely agree. I actually found a list, this was a couple of years ago, but a list of all the studies that have gone into looking to see if there was a link between vaccines and autism. It was hundreds of thousands of children, millions of dollars, millions of research hours to find no link. Nothing. Over and over. Different groups, all different. So different science groups, all different groups of people from different communities across the globe. It is, we know for sure there is no link based on all that's been done. And like Dr. Tony said, now what we need to do is take those people, the money and the resources, and try to figure out what does cause autism. And we do know that it's genetic, and there have been some kind of small clues as to which genes and different combinations and things, but we still don't have it unlocked completely because it's the brain, and the brain is so complicated. We don't know a lot about the brain.
The brain. Didn't we just say we didn't want to affect the brain? We want to keep the brain. we don't know. We have to just scratch the surface of the brain.
The brain is like almost like the final frontier.
So fascinating. It's so fascinating.
There's just
I remember hearing in medical school, like we understand like 10% of it or something like that.
But you know what's funny is the more we learn, it's like, okay, let's revise that. 10% is more like 2.
Yeah, exactly. Or something like that. Like it's ridiculous how much we don't know about the brain. So
yeah. So there's more to learn. We don't know, but the whole, how did we get here? Like that was one of the big pieces that MMR scare that drove us to having a mistrust of vaccines. And I want to show off my t-shirt, which I've shown before, but vaccines cause adults.
Again, this is not for those of you listening to the podcast who are going to our YouTube, so that you can see the videos of
exactly. Yes, you can see the t-shirt, but like, because I wear this, because there are t-shirts that have been made by the people who follow Voldemort. And they have t-shirts and things that say vaccines cause autism. So in response, vaccines cause adults. That's my mantra. So one of the things that also kind of kept going is that with this start of people having more serious mistrust in vaccines, in 2019, I believe it was, vaccine hesitancy was listed as a top 10 global threat to health, because people are, not getting all of the vaccines that can protect them from these deadly infectious diseases. So it's a top 10 threat to global health. And it has to do with, there's so many different elements, and I think this is, probably a tangent that would be for another podcast, but fake news and social media and, all these different ways that people kind of share their information, it spreads like wildfire. And they've also, the other thing is vaccines are a victim of their own success. People will say, oh, well, I don't see that anymore. Why do I need to get vaccinated for that? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because we're an interconnected global world. You can be in St. Lucia in 8 hours.
Where you start from.
True, depending on where you start from. If you start from, somewhere more south. But my point is, like, we go all over the world and all these things haven't been eliminated. So the Columbus, Ohio outbreak, they're not sure if it's travel related, but they think it is. It's likely travel related. And it probably came from an area where measles is more endemic than Ohio. So we are a global society that's interconnected, and that they're still out there. So even though we may not see some of these infectious diseases at home, or maybe you personally haven't seen them, not you as in Dr. Tony, but you as in the listener in the world, they're still out there. You know, polio's coming back. We know that. We have
a whole podcast dedicated to that.
Yeah. So I was gonna.
Measles has been springing up over the years, right? We've had pockets of measles springing up. You know, there was that Disney outbreak several years ago. And it just keeps popping up, and it's just going to continue to pop up, especially in light of, we just released our latest podcast episode about pediatric vaccines. Just nobody's getting them, like, not that nobody's getting them, but they're like, the rates of uptake are much lower than they have been. And so our efforts are going to transition into teaching you about diseases that you have to worry about now that we never had to worry about before, because we're just not being proactive in trying to figure out how to prevent them, and I know it's complicated. It's just it is so complicated, and one at a time, right? Like, let's talk about it one at a time so that it's not confusing, and understand that things are going to get even worse now with the Twitter news that they're not banning misinformation anymore.
Oh my God.
That's going to be more, it's going to be even more confusing. You're going to be in the interwebs and confused even more.
Yeah.
And so we're going to hold steady. And one of the things that we've actually been very successful, I think, that we've been able to do is, like, if you get articles or see videos or whatever it is that are frightening you and stressing you out, send them to us, and we'll break it down line by line. Like, I think that's something that I've been wanting to do, and we have done here, is really going through it line by line as folks that have no financial interests whatsoever in giving you wrong information, right? Like, that there's nothing there. We really truly just want everybody to live their best lives, right? And so send that to us. It's going to get crazier. It is going to get crazier, and we just don't want you to get caught up in it. But
I was just gonna say, I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like, so Twitter just recently announced that it's no longer gonna filter or stop misinformation, particularly in the context of COVID. But I think we can just say across the board, they don't care. It's free speech, and whoever wants to say whatever they want to say, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, it's going to be spewed on Twitter. So that just means that even though I feel like you and I, Dr. Tony, are combating this every minute of every day, now it's going to be every second of every minute of every day. So we have that. And then, so let's keep that in mind. But the thing I wanted to end on, and I'm going to shift over to Dr. Tony, is what can you do to keep your kids safe during, like, an outbreak like this? Like, there's one obvious thing, but
the best thing to do is to get your kiddos vaccinated. I don't know what else to say. I mean, besides hand washing and stop licking the table and get your face off of that garbage can and the stuff that we're normally doing, and stop eating the zoo fence and all of those things that we're telling our children to do. I mean, you can do all of that stuff and still get measles if you're not vaccinated. That's just basically the way that it is, right? What's so awesome about measles is, unlike the rest of them, it's 2 shots. It's 2 and done. And you're finito. Like, that's it.
We can say that with confidence. 2 and done.
Like, it's not going to be, stay tuned to our next episode when we tell you how many more shots you need. Nope. Measles is 2 shots. That's it. And part of the reason why is because it's a live attenuated virus. And it has a very strong, well, that just means weakened, live weakened virus that just is really efficient at teaching your immune system how to look out for those intruders. Like, it's so good at it. And so you only need 2, and then you're done. And yes, you know, to those parents who have had it and have been like, you know, I feel like they've had a bad reaction and all that stuff. You know, that fever is scary. My son had it when he was 12 months old, he got the MMR. He had a scary fever. He really did. And I saw it happening to him. And I was just like, it's just the measles. He's just reacting. He's just teaching. You know, I had to go through that whole process, and he was fine. He was fine right after. And so I've experienced the reaction that a lot of people have said that their kids have gone through, that have scared them. You just have to be prepared for it mentally. They're going to get through it. It's going to be okay. 2 shots.
Yeah, exactly. 2 shots and done. And then just to give you even, I think, you know, more ammunition for getting this vaccine is that after the first dose, it's been shown to be about 92 to 93% effective at preventing infection. And after the second dose, it's like 97 to 98%. So, you know, just get them both.
Yeah.
2 and done for life. For life.
That's it. Like, if you still, you know, you can check your blood. This is one where you could check your blood and see what your antibodies are. And it'll tell you like, yep, you're fine. You know, if you're interested, this is one where we've really done, I think, a pretty good job. And so, yeah.
That's what I wanted to tell the people.
That's for you people. So if there's anything that you want to argue with us about, bring it on.
Send us an email. You know, I would say, you know, please, if you find this informative, share our podcast with people that you know, neighbors, friends, family, anyone who you think could benefit from hearing about vaccines and how they work, and, you know, recent infectious outbreaks and things like that, from people who, you know, we are experts in the field, but we also do our best at trying to break down things in understandable terms. Like, that's one of the things that I think I find the most fun. So I'm going to leave you with the fact that measles wipes the immune memory hard drive. That's our analogy for today.
It is. All right, y'all. See you later.